Imagine being told you've got heart failure and you need a transplant within the next year to survive. That's what happened to my guest today at the age of just 41. But so far, thanks to pioneering surgery, he's avoided the need for a heart transplant. I'm journalist Angela Walker, and in this podcast, I talk to inspirational people and discuss underreported issues. My guests today are BBC sports reporter and friend Chris Slegg and clinical psychologist Mina Arvanitopoulou. This podcast is sponsored by DoctorsNet UK. With over 250,000 members, DoctorsNet UK is the UK's largest professional network of GMC-verified doctors. They're a community that enables you to make connections, find support and improve your clinical knowledge and practice all in one place. Join your colleagues today. Membership is free. Mina Arvanitopoulou, Chris Slegg, thanks very much for joining me.
Thanks for having us, Angela.
Thank you for inviting us.
So, Mina, I'm looking forward to hearing from you and to finding out how you help patients like Chris. But first of all, Chris, let's find out about your story. When did you first realise that you had a problem with your heart?
Yeah, I found out I had been born with this really rare condition called Ebstein's Anomaly back in the year 2000, actually. So I was 22 at that point. I was at Sheffield University doing a journalism degree, and I was just finding it increasingly hard. Sheffield's a really hilly place, and just walking to lectures, I was getting breathless. And I thought my asthma, which I've had since birth, had got worse. Went to the GP at Sheffield, and she listened to my chest, and she said, "You've got something wrong with your heart. We need to send you next door to the hospital," which is one of the best hospitals in the country, Sheffield Heart Hospital. Very quickly, within a couple of days, they told me that I had this really rare condition. I was leaving university that summer, was referred back down to Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital in London, where I've been ever since. And I was told that summer I was going to need surgery straight away to repair my leaking tricuspid valve. A second opinion meant that surgery never went ahead. And with hindsight, I think that was the right decision. And then nothing really did happen until much further on. I had my first open heart surgery in the year 2020 in the end, and we'll come on to that later. But yeah, it was when I was a student at Sheffield that I found out I'd been born with this congenital heart defect. I'd had it all my life. Looking back, it makes a lot more sense. I really struggled playing a sport at school. My inhalers never made any difference. I don't think that was asthma that was affecting me in my sport, although I did also have asthma. But yeah, it was when I was a 22-year-old student that I was diagnosed with this condition, which has become increasingly hard to live with. But I'm feeling pretty positive now about the challenges that probably still lie ahead as well.
So what exactly is this heart condition that you've got? You mentioned the tricuspid valve. What's going on there?
Yeah, so my heart, Ebstein's Anomaly, it only affects 1 in, I think, 200,000 people who are born are affected by this. It's a really rare condition, and it's a disease of the right ventricle and also the tricuspid valve. Now, most congenital heart defects, I've only learnt this recently, are of the left ventricle. Much more is known about those defects. Nearly all the drugs that exist are for the left ventricle. There's very little that can help the right ventricle. My valve was leaking, but not to a terrible extent when it was discovered. Now, there are children born with this who sadly do not survive. There are many who have to be operated on when they are born or very soon when they are very, very young. There's others who could live their whole life and never need surgery. And there's people right in the middle like me. And when you're right in the middle like me, no one really knows what to do. I've learned that over the last few years. And that's why I had this kind of confusing news when I was 20. We're going to operate, then we're not going to operate. And every year it was like, we're not going to operate, we're not going to operate, we're not going to operate, we're not going to operate. We think it's the best thing to leave it, until I got to the age of, 41, when they said, no, I'd have been 40, and they said, we need to operate now. The leak's it's gone from moderate to severe. We need to operate. We're going to use this thing called a cone repair, where they twist your own valve into a better shape. It's going to function better. We're very, very confident, and I'd always been led to believe this for 20 years, that when we do this valve repair, you're going to be in a much better shape and you won't need any other surgical intervention in your life. I had that valve repair in August 2020, kind of in the midst of COVID. I felt very, very lucky at the time to even have an operation. The hospital felt almost deserted to me. So many people were having things cancelled. My surgery went ahead. Everyone was very, very happy with it. They loved the way it looked. The valve repair to them looked amazing. you're going to go out of here, you're going to have a much better life now. A year on, so summer of 2021, I was in a really bad place. I couldn't unload my own dishwasher without my arms hurting. I couldn't hang the washing on the line without my arms hurting. My body was heavy. Suddenly this condition I'd had all my life, I could feel it. And to an extent, I can still feel it now. It's only the last 3 years where I feel this disease. And that was really, really hard to cope with. But I kind of thought, I've been told this has all gone well. You know, I'm just getting used to it. Mm. I went back for my checkup a year after the surgery, and I could visibly see the panic on the face of the people in the hospital. I knew straight away that they knew things were not good with my heart. And I was told by, kind of unfortunately, I was seen by a cardiologist I'd never seen before, because my own cardiologist was having to quarantine because of COVID. You know, that was still affecting so many people in so many different ways. And someone I'd never seen before told me, you're going to need a transplant within a year. And I fell apart. I fell apart because I had never, ever been prepared for that. It had never been mentioned to me. It had always been mentioned, we're going to repair the valve. We're really confident. And obviously, you know, nothing's ever guaranteed. But the idea that I would need a heart transplant was never been said to me. And I went home in a state of shock, and I was too shocked to tell anyone. I didn't tell my wife for a couple of weeks. I started to research heart transplants, and with the best will in the world, I could only interpret everything that was written there positively in a very negative way, because it had never been something I thought was going to be part of my life. And, you know, there is still, I don't want to take away hope from anyone who's in that position. There'll be people listening out there who may need a heart transplant, who are about to have one, who've had one, and there's hope. There's plenty of hope. I've spoken to people since. But when I learnt about it and I read the stats, and 50% of people survive more than 5 years, I interpreted that as well. 50% don't. And obviously then you start to think, what if I can't find a heart? What if my body doesn't accept it? And these are all things I may have to come to again, because the next step, if I need a next step, will be a transplant. There's nothing else they can do beyond what they've done, which we'll come on to later. But getting that news was something that sent me into a really difficult place mentally. And it's only thanks to Mina that I was able to get out of that.
So there you are. You go into hospital to have a checkup on an operation you've had to repair the valve, and you get this life-altering news. You said it took you weeks before you could even share that news with your wife. What was going through your mind?
To me, it felt, and I am getting emotional now talking about it, I felt that suddenly my whole future looked very, very different. And I thought the minute I told anyone else about that, the whole of their future would look different too. And for as long as I could keep it a secret, in some ways it wasn't really real. It wasn't something we all had to admit and we all had to face. And I knew that the minute I told that news, not just to my wife, but to my mum and my dad, that everything would be different for people. And I wanted to delay that. And then my mum kind of realised I was holding something back, and I just told her. I think I possibly even told her just before I told my wife. And I mean, you know, I have the most amazing wife, the most amazing parents, the most amazing friends, the most amazing colleagues, of which you were once one, mm-hmm. Angie, and it was great memories of working with you. Despite all of that support, I didn't feel, I don't think strong enough's the right word. I just couldn't get myself into a position where I could articulate this. And I didn't want to be the bearer of bad news. I'm so lucky until this point that I still have parents in very good health. I have my wife does. We haven't really had any sort of, you know, really life-altering news to have to face together. And I felt like, I'm kind of the one crashing, you know, ruining the party here if I have to tell everyone this. It's in the run-up to Christmas as well. You're kind of thinking, try and put it off, but I wasn't able to do that. And I'm glad I didn't. And, you know, the minute you share news, it becomes so much easier. So everyone would be my advice to everyone, you know, talk to someone, whoever it is. Because the minute you start to share news, you can start to embrace that as your reality. And, you know, other people around you, they're grown-ups, and they realise they have to embrace it as part of their reality too. And, you know, all of us here, we would do that to our loved ones too. So, yeah, the minute I was able to share the news, things did start to get easier. But I still, and it was much, much later before Mina came along, I still needed professional support, despite having an amazing support network around me.
Mina, it sounds from what Chris is saying that he was so worried about the effect that his illness was going to have on his loved ones. What he's talking about here, he's not even talking about concern for his own health, really, is he? He's talking about the impact of his condition on his family. Is that something that you hear a lot from the patients that you work with?
Yes, absolutely. And, obviously I'm not just talking about Chris. Everyone is very different. Every one of us is very unique, and we all have very different circumstances, and we are different phases in life. But this is something that we see a lot for slightly different reasons for people as well. Sometimes this involves a fear of letting people down, perhaps. But I can also feel that, and I'm not talking about Chris now, I'm generalizing. It can also feel that perhaps we have, lots of identities, lots of roles, lots of commitments in our life, and we feel that we're failing. There's a sense of failing in something, a sense of letting people down, but also us perhaps not being the provider, for example, or the protector. We have these sort of roles in our minds a lot of the times. We see that in men, but also in women. It can take slightly different context or format. But yes, and ultimately it's also about obviously considering our own pain and suffering, but also we can absorb our our family's pain and suffering and anxiety. And I think a very important point that Chris made is about communications, because a lot of the times what happens is that when patients have this news, they don't communicate that straight away, or even for a long duration, they keep things to themselves about how they feel, even if the families do know about what's happening, but they tend to hold on to the most uncomfortable feeling. So then that creates, it can create a lot of distance. The family doesn't know what to do, how to support the patient. They have their own understanding, their own assumptions about what a patient may be feeling, but also the patient is not fully aware about how others feel. So that creates a lot of distance and lack of support, because you don't have that ability, that opportunity really to get and to receive and give support.
And Chris, I know that you're a devoted husband and a dad as well. You've got 2 small children, and I know that one of your greatest fears was for your kids, wasn't it?
It was the overriding thing that upset me, having 2 small children who are now 8 and 5, but were a couple of years younger at the point I got this news, just before Christmas 2021. I interpreted the need for a transplant, which I've so far managed to avoid, in the most negative way I could interpret that news. And although I wasn't receiving a terminal diagnosis, and my heart goes out to anyone out there who has or will, it felt very close to that for me. And what I've learned also is all of my life, and I think we all have this, and I certainly had it when I learnt at the age of 22, I had this serious condition. How you think you would cope receiving bad news, or certainly in my instance anyway, I can't say it's true for anyone, how I thought I would cope in the event one day of receiving bad news was a million miles away from actually receiving really bad news. I was, no matter how prepared I thought I would be one day perhaps to get that news, I just wasn't anywhere close to knowing how to deal with it. And yeah, the thing that upset me most was, how would I ever tell my children? How would I prepare them if the very worst situation comes along? And I have to be honest, I'm not completely there with that one yet either, because fortunately I'm not yet at a situation where I have to do that. But I felt before Christmas 2021, this is the beginning of the end, I guess, not wanting to sound over dramatic. And I'm going to have to prepare my children for the fact that they might be losing their dad. And thankfully, I'm not close to that yet. But I was every day breaking down, crying about what it would mean to my children if they lost their dad early on and how they would cope. I was feeling, how would they grieve? How would they be bereaved? It wasn't mourning my own loss as such. It was kind of mourning what my loss would mean to them. And just from a couple of people I've spoken to over the last 18 months who've very different health conditions, but serious, that seems to be something others have had too, where I think a lot of us feel like and again, I don't know if I could, but a lot of us feel like we could cope with that's going to happen to us, but coping with what it means to your family, your wife, your kids, your parents, your friends. And actually, I'd say all of those things there, all those other people I mentioned, wife, parents, friends, to me anyway, that was a million miles away from what it would mean to my kids. It was much, much harder for me to deal with that, what it would mean to my kids and to any of those people, because I thought they'd get over it. They're growing ups. They'd be obviously very upset. They'd find a way, but I couldn't work out in my head how my kids could. And that really, really, really troubled me for well over a year. From the day I received the news, I was, in this guy's eyes, I was definitely going to need a transplant within a year. Probably until I started seeing Mina. Every single day I would cry about that thought, every single day, for just over really a year until I met Mina. And then I was able to start to deal more positively. And now I feel a lot more positive about the future I have and the present that I have.
Mina, when we're parents, we just want to protect our kids, don't we? And then for someone like Chris, he has this major life-changing news and it's completely out of his hands. He can't be that protector of his kids because there's nothing that he can do. Like, how can you help people like Chris come to terms with these feelings, overwhelming feelings that Chris said? You know, he was upset and crying about this every day because what could he do about it? How do you help people with feelings like that?
Well, there isn't one way that fits all. So obviously, it depends how everyone is affected. I think most importantly is to provide that space first, that safe place to start reflecting on the different layers of impact. So as Chris mentioned, one layer is how he felt this will affect his family. And there are so many other layers as well. Others more important than, perhaps some are more important than others. But I think most importantly is to start sort of encouraging that acceptance that Chris said. It will take time. Coming to terms is not something that happens overnight. And it really takes a lot of effort to understand all the different, very unpleasant emotions that someone is experiencing or could experience. You know, the grief, the sense of loss, trauma, perhaps, in a lot of cases. You know, Chris has had a few sort of surgeries, and the trauma of hearing those news, that shows us how the trauma is not only on the body, but in the mind as well, about fear about your own loss, the uncertainty, the lack of control, as you said. You use the word control. That is a very common theme, not feeling in control about the future. All of these different unpleasant and very devastating, really, situations and unpleasant feelings that someone has, I think there needs to be a safe place to be reflected, explored further, to allow the person to realize, understand themselves a lot better. Something that I think it's a few points to make that are important is that a lot of people, and we see that so much in cardiology, but also with other conditions as well, there is a confusion between weakness and vulnerability. So suddenly, if our body malfunctions in some way, we start feeling weak in ourselves. We think others see us as weak as well. And I think this is something that we need to start differentiating, that our bodies can be vulnerable, but that doesn't make us weak. Sort of concepts like that, it takes time to reflect and understand how they apply to us. But also there are ways of encouraging perhaps living more in the moment, in the here and now, because this is the only thing we can control. This is the only thing we can be certain of. And then there is another very important point, which we call post-traumatic growth, which is learning to live and to get a lot of meaning through adversity. You develop other aspects of yourself that you hadn't developed before the challenges. And through that, I guess one of the goals of therapy is to also the person learns to live a more meaningful life. You start evaluating how your life is, how you'd like it to be. You start visualizing how you'd like your life to be, doing things that matter, really matter to you.
That's really interesting, because I had a colleague and he was always really happy. And I said, you always got a smile on your face. You're always really happy. And he told me that he'd been involved in a near fatal car crash. Yeah. And after that, he was so happy to be alive that it changed his whole outlook on life. So it's interesting that you mentioned that. Yeah. Chris, did you feel resentful because you were like a young man, you were a successful TV reporter with a beautiful wife and children, you're in your prime and your body's letting you down? Was there a resentment there?
I don't feel that thought wasn't there. It was a real fear. It was a real fear of, how quickly might my life deteriorate, my quality of life. And I'm so lucky to have everything that I have physically, and the health that I still have, and the health that I have anyway. But it was the fear of if this person, this medical person, is telling me my heart can only survive another year, then and this was the biggest fear. This was part of the biggest fear. Was what on earth? What is my life going to look like? I don't understand. What is going to be left. And another fear I had was I had come out of hospital in August 2020 having had my tricuspid valve repaired, and everyone was very happy and everyone had pretty much assured me your life's going to be better. And again, obviously, I said there's no guarantee that I don't hold anything against them. That was a medical opinion. They looked at it looked good. They're happy. You're going to go. Your quality of life's going to improve. A year down the line, I felt like I had one bar left on the battery that was my heart, and I thought, they're telling me now that I'm going to need a transplant, and this was before we got to the thing they've done instead. I thought if anything else goes wrong, I felt like I couldn't, not necessarily trust, but I couldn't believe anything anymore. I thought if something goes wrong again, there's going to be nothing left. I mean, I'm going to have no energy left at all. I couldn't imagine how I'd be able to carry on doing my job as a journalist. As you know, working in TV and radio, it's physical journalism. It's not just written journalism, which has its own challenges anyway, but physical journalism, getting to different places, multiple places in a day, helping your camera operator, carrying their very heavy kit around. I don't think I've ever had that feeling of why me. That hasn't come to me, and I don't blame anyone that it's come to. I think, as Mina said, you'll never meet anyone else who's in exactly the same position, exactly the same circumstances, who will deal with things in the same ways. That resentment feeling wasn't one that came to me, but it was a massive fear of what my life is going to look like and what it's going to mean for my family. Just even getting the kids to school. So at that point, as I say, 2 years ago, having to push my youngest in a pushchair was beyond me. And I couldn't imagine, how am I going to do the school run when my wife, what's that going to mean for her? Just, every single day of your life is going to be impacted in a different way. And those are all things we may have to come to again one day. But right now, I'm in a much better place health-wise than I was in 2021, physically and mentally a lot better too. So if anything, maybe receiving the bad news that I did in the way that I did, brutal though it was, has got me preparing for a longer, mid to long-term future sooner than I might have done. So that's probably a helpful thing.
So when you shared the news with your wife, Sonia, how did you feel after you'd done that? Because that was a bit of a milestone, wasn't it? You'd kept that as a secret, your condition up until that point.
I felt a lot better, and I was worried I was going to feel a lot worse, and I was worried it was from that point on both our lives were just going to be kind of thrown into disarray and negativity. But yeah, from the minute it was physically, you physically feel the weight of a secret lift off your body. And also you take strength from the reaction of this person that you love, that loves you, who deals with it in a really strong way, as my parents did too, because, they're not going to fold. They know they need to be strong for you. And through that, you take greater strength. And, you realise, obviously, they are able to encompass this as part of their reality too. Obviously, they know it might change things, might change them immensely, it might change them to a smaller degree, but they are now ready for that change too. I mean, you're not going to be able to keep that a secret forever with this kind of condition. So I felt I was so great. I was so happy that I'd been able to say it, because I'd been keeping it inside for 2 weeks. And that would be my advice to anyone. Don't bottle it up. It's tough, but you've got to face reality, and you've got to allow the loved ones around you who are going to be impacted to face that too, and to face it together. So, again, not everyone has that. Not everyone listening has that. And for anyone who doesn't have family around them, I'm so lucky to have that. I hope they have a friend they can turn to. If not, find someone. There's support networks out there. Again, I was so lucky to be offered counselling through my hospital with Mina, and not everyone will have that. I feel so fortunate to have had it, but just find someone to talk to, because the minute you can share news, it just helps. It makes it reality, and you realise just suddenly, or I did at least. I don't want to speak for everyone because it's different. Just 1% of you is, oh yeah, it's okay making this reality, and then 2% of you is like, yeah, it's okay making this reality. And then the way I live now, I've fully embraced my new reality, and there's bits of it I hate, but I feel a lot more in control of it now. I think one of you said earlier, the loss of control. That was something I really struggled with, because you realise, like, for the first time really facing your own mortality. And I think that takes me back to what I said earlier about, we're all kind of think we know we're prepared for the worst news, but actually getting it suddenly made me feel like I wasn't in control of anything at all. And now I feel like I am in control again. I'm realistic that could be some other bad things coming down the line, but I feel in control.
You're better equipped mentally to deal with those. Yeah. So you'd had this terrifying news that you would probably need a heart transplant within a year, but instead you actually had a different pioneering procedure. Tell us about that, Chris, because that's brought you to where you are today. You're over a year since you were told that you would need a heart transplant within a year. So talk us through what the surgery you did have and how that helped. Yeah,
and again, it's so amazing how, there's so many different opinions out there, and different cardiologists will think different things. And, I truly believe the vast majority of them are doing their very, very best, working in a very tough field and making the calls that they genuinely think are right. But I had a second. I went for a second opinion. I spent pretty much every second of free time that I had in the first half of 2022 getting my medical notes into a position to send out to the United States, where there's the Mayo Clinic, which is probably the leading clinic anywhere in the world regarding Ebstein's anomaly. If they've done more surgeries there. And I even considered traveling to America to actually have an appointment. I was able to have one online for a cost which, fortunately, I was able to afford. My long-term cardiologist had also done research, and he suggested what we should do is this operation called the Glen, where they take the main vein out of your heart and plug it straight into the main artery. And that takes about a third of the pressure off of your right ventricle. It means it has to do less work. He also went to Bristol Heart Hospital for a second opinion. They agreed with him. And independently, through what I was talking to with Boston, they agreed too. And it was only at that point, so this is about summer 2022, when I felt reassured that if kind of three different people, my long-term cardiologist and the Mayo Clinic in America and Bristol Heart, say the Glen, and Bristol sent me a document, and it basically said, this is your only option. It's that or a heart transplant. And to me, it was a very easy decision, but I didn't have the trust it was actually going to work. So having already had major heart surgery, which had made my heart a lot worse in many ways, I was really worried that this was going to leave me in an even worse position. And so this second major heart surgery became a real mental challenge in the way that the first had never been. The first to me had just been a physical challenge, horrible though it was. Go into hospital, have your heart corrected, spend 3 months sadly not being able to do much, not being able to work, long time back to recovery. But I'd always felt in 2020 that tricuspid valve repair was going to be it, was going to mend my heart as well as it could, and the future was going to be bright. I'm now in a position where I'm facing having open heart surgery effectively. They don't open the heart, but they've got to open your chest again. They've got to move all the wiring up your circulatory system around. And I was told they'd never done one on an adult at this stage. So the Glen's very rare. I mean, Ebstein's anomaly is very rare. A tricuspid valve repair in adults is very rare. A Glen, when it's done, is usually done at the same time as the tricuspid valve repair, or if not, it's usually done within days or weeks because it's become apparent quickly that the tricuspid repair alone hasn't been sufficient. So they do a Glen. That's called a late Glen when it's done within days or weeks. Mine was being done over a year and over 2 years after my tricuspid valve repair. And I was told this is the latest anywhere in the world we've ever done a Glen on adult or child. And I was left feeling basically the only thing separating me from a heart transplant is something you've never done on an adult at this stage. And I can accept now that I've always been quite a negative person, and I could not see any way this was going to improve things. And so going into for this operation almost exactly just over a year ago, October 2022, I probably went in with quite a defeatist attitude. I went into hospital without much faith this was going to make any difference at all. And that probably made it all a lot harder as well. And as I was leaving the hospital and I was in tears pretty much every day in the hospital, my cardiologist, I actually went to sleep for the operation with the cardiologist I've had for 20 years. I woke up now because he's about to retire in the care of Dr. Hannah Douglas. And she has a very, very different outlook from anything I've experienced in the past. And she could see how troubled I was mentally by this. And she just said, you've been through trauma. You've been through a trauma twice. You've been living with a trauma since you knew you had a heart condition. And we will get you a clinical psychologist. Now, I don't know, Mina will know better, but even at St. Thomas's, which is one of the best hospitals in the world, this is quite a new thing. And they've got far too many people to help as well.
Yeah, I had just literally started my job there, I think.
Yeah. So I feel so lucky. And I wouldn't have had maybe strength isn't the right word. I wouldn't have had the wherewithal to ask for this kind of support. I'll be honest, I had actually sought counselling in the middle of 2022 when I was dealing with the bad news, but I couldn't find anyone who knew what I was talking about really. And again, I don't blame them, but I was kind of looking for a specialism that really isn't there to deal with what I was trying to go through. And I had a couple of sessions with different people and I was like, it's no fault of their own, but that doesn't help me. So I feel very lucky that I inherited a new cardiologist who knew that this wasn't just a physical challenge coming out of open heart surgery.
But it seems like such an obvious thing that somebody who's been through such a physical trauma, the mental trauma of living with a condition that could be life-limiting, life-threatening, they're worried about their family, they're worried about their health, their work, their future. It seems really obvious that people going through that would need some emotional support, Mina. Shouldn't everybody get that when they're going through something like that?
Absolutely. And I think, in the last 17 years, specialized in cardiology in different trusts, there is increasing sort of evidence for that, for our values, and, psychology and physical health. I've always worked in physical health. And from when I started to now, there is increasing sort of funding and sort of value in that, definitely. I mean, in an ideal world, every sort of significant clinic, dealing with a physical injury or physical condition would have a psychologist, because now we know the impact. I know we're not there yet, but I am very fortunate also to work in a department where we are left to decide how much input to give to patients. So, it's to use our own clinical decision whether someone might need a few sessions, perhaps mainly normalization, giving some validation, to anything up to 20 or more sessions if needed. But also we are trained in delivering different models, different therapeutic approaches to different needs. So we now can use a particular model which is called EMDR, which is applicable for trauma as well. We haven't needed to do that with Chris. That wasn't what it was needed at the time for Chris. But what I'm saying is that we can tailor our approach to the needs, and I think this is so important. And I know Chris, he's done a lot of work around that by just talking about his experience. This is very rare, and I really wanted to really say how much I and all of us appreciate that, because a man in their 40s that don't often sort of talk publicly about how the particular situation, particular experience, particular adventure, physical health sort of affected them. So, yeah, that's absolutely amazing.
Thank you, Chris, for sharing what you've been going through with us, because I can feel the trauma, I can feel the emotion. It's still really raw, isn't it? So what is it that's made you want to share your experience?
I guess because I've learned so much from it too, and I didn't see the condition I had, that I've had all my life, that I became aware of when I was 22, and which really started to impact me in my early 40s. I never saw that as a mental challenge. I always saw it as a physical challenge. And I think I've learned so much in the last year, and I've reflected so much, and I'm able to do that in a much more positive way. I realise now I lived in denial of this condition for a good 20 years. And actually, I would say some of that denial is probably beneficial and helpful, and I probably needed it, because learning at the age of 22 that you've got this condition, you're able then to not contemplate it every day. And why would you contemplate it every day? And I was able to kind of shut it away. But what I realised now was I just completely put it in this little box. And I went through one massive heart surgery in August 2020, where it was still kind of like, I've gone into hospital, been cut open, sewed my heart back up, had all these other minor operations as well. So I had about 5 before I even had the Glen, one major, 4 kind of comparatively minor, and just kind of soldiered on, as we all do. And I think we are at this, our generation is in this position where our parents, they were the children of people who were literally fighting in the Second World War. I've thought about this so much, so sorry to, and they were kind of very much of the, you just don't moan, you soldier on. That's the advice from our parents. And our parents do that. They don't moan about anything. They just, and we kind of had that bred into us. And I know actually when I was delivered the news, I had Ebstein's Anomaly, and my mum talks about this a lot actually. The cardiologist kind of delivered the news as well. Look, nothing to worry about. I deal with babies who are literally dying in front of me, and you've really got nothing to worry about. And we felt a little bit kind of like palmed off there, like in a way. But then I thought, yeah, no, he's right. What have I got to worry about? I'm not, I'm lucky. My condition is nowhere near as bad as some people. But actually, I've realised now that's quite a dangerous thought to carry around for 20 years, right? Of course, we all have sympathy for people who are in a worse condition than us. We all do. But it doesn't detract at all from what you as an individual are going through, whatever that is. Whatever bad news you've had, it doesn't matter where it is on this health spectrum. It doesn't matter that there's millions of people worse off than you, or, millions of people kind of with what you might see as lesser. It's changing your life. It's going to change your life, whatever news you've just had. And that's going to be hard to deal with. And you have to be able to accept that. And I think, this word guilt comes up a lot. And I was always, I don't feel guilty. I realise now a lot of that is guilt. A lot of it is, I shouldn't be moaning. I shouldn't be worrying about this thing I've got because others are worse off. Well, actually, of course, others are worse off. And you're always going to have empathy for them. But you have to be able to accept this is changing my life. This is affecting me. And so I never felt like I wanted to talk about it or let people see it was affecting my life until I guess it got to the point where it so obviously was, and I had to. And then all of this stuff was overwhelming. I mean, that's a word that's come up a lot. It was overwhelming. I couldn't deal with it. So why I'm talking about it, for many, one of the reasons is because of mental health aspects of having open heart surgery. And open heart surgery in itself, and having Dr. Hannah Douglas describe it as a trauma gave me so much. Yeah, wow, I've been through a trauma. I get that
Validation, I guess.
That it was like a validation of that. The other reason I want to talk about it is Ebstein's anomaly. No one talks about it. You just don't hear about it because it's so rare. And when I've tried to find other support or anything written in the past, there's so little there about it. There's just not going. There's, as Dr. Hannah Douglas will say, all of the research is going into the left ventricle. We need more research into diseases of the right ventricle, like Ebstein's. There's barely any drugs that can help with the right ventricle. So I want to talk more about Ebstein's. I want people to become aware of it. I want people who have it to know it exists. For many years, I've got this thing, and I talk about it to people, and I'm like, what is it? I don't really know. And I've now found a couple of support groups on Facebook. One in the US, one here in the UK, which not everyone would find that sort of thing helpful. Sometimes I don't actually find it helpful. Sometimes I do. People obviously use it in different ways. Some people share an awful lot of information, which to me, sometimes I wouldn't want to share that much. And I feel it hard to see that much. Everyone's got to gauge what works for them. But yeah, I want to talk about Ebstein's. I want people to know it exists. I want people to know how it affects people, and it affects people in different ways to different degrees. And I want people to understand that open heart surgery is a huge mental challenge, and no one should feel. I know a friend of mine, and he won't mind me saying, said with the first operation, "That's just routine now, open heart surgery, you'll be fine." And I kind of agreed, and I was like, deep down I didn't agree. Deep down I was terrified, and it's not routine. It's not routine. You're allowed to be scared. It's going to impact you. You're almost certainly going to be okay, because it's amazing what we can do in this country. You're almost certainly going to be able to recover okay. And in most cases, you're probably going to have a better quality of life, fingers crossed. But it's scary. Being in intensive care is intense.
Of course. And it was COVID as well, wasn't it?
It was COVID. Yeah.
You're under that obvious pressure that we're all under as well. So you had this procedure, the late Glenn, and that was just over a year ago. So how did that work out for you? Has it improved your life? Has it helped your heart? So
we're just over a year on, and I had a checkup a couple of weeks ago, and they said it's stable. They said it hasn't improved, it hasn't got worse. And just for a couple of minutes, I felt a bit down, I'll be honest. I felt a bit down that it hadn't improved. But then I felt a lot better that it hasn't got worse, because I was, I'm nearly 2 years on now from having been told you're going to need a heart transplant within a year. I've still got my own heart, and I actually feel a lot better than a year ago. So I kind of thought, obviously they've got to tell me what their scans show, and they've got to be very honest about their opinion. And I wouldn't want them to be anything else. But actually, I feel better. I feel physically better. I can hang the washing up. I can unload the dishwasher. I can do simple household tasks. I feel like I have more energy. Mentally, I feel so much better.
You look really well, Chris. You've got a bit of colour in your cheeks, and you definitely seem a lot more upbeat than I know you were a while back. Mina, what kind of strategies can you give people like Chris who've got this burden that they're carrying around with them? How can they accept this new reality that they're living with, and the way that it might change their future? How do you help them?
It's a really good question. There isn't one or five, let's say, strategies that sort of make that happen. I think, again, it's a process. It's important to understand that therapy is not always about fixing something. It's just also a lot, Chris made really interesting points and said that in different ways a few times, about allowing yourself to really validate your experience and to acknowledge the trauma that you've been through. I think this is one of the first things. And I would also sum it up using the word self-compassion. So it's not about comparing yourselves to others, but it's about understanding how certain events or a health condition has affected us and on the different layers. There's another point that Chris made that I also wanted to touch upon, which is what we call toxic positivity. I don't know if you've sort of come across that concept, which is about, sometimes we do it to ourselves, sometimes we do it to others by saying, I'm lucky to have had that, I shouldn't complain. Or you're lucky to be alive. And that really what it does, if someone says that to us, for example, at the time where really we're hurting, but someone says, you're lucky to be alive, it almost gives us the sense that we shouldn't really complain. And that invalidates the whole experience, and it really shuts us down. So I think coming back to that, communication is key, sharing our experiences, and also a note that I made earlier on what Chris was saying. It's what he was describing, what it was like for him talking about the experience to his family. It's about showing vulnerability, and that can really make us feel much, much stronger when we actually allow others to see that vulnerability in us. There's so much strength in us in that. So other things that I would sort of continue, perhaps more generically, sort of commenting on, it would be about also setting realistic expectations, because that's to do a lot with our self-image. So there's a lot of work to be done to understand about what our self-image sort of involves. And we said earlier that if the body sort of malfunctions, some people feel really that they're suffering because there's nothing else for them. If they don't feel physically strong, they feel like they're failing in life. So again, it's about understanding other things that they can offer, that they can experience with their minds, with their personality, with the way they think, the way they experience situations, relationships. It's not only about the body. Setting realistic goals, risk expectations, find meaningful relationships, invest in relationships rather than materials and money and being productive. We'd rather invest in relationships with our loved ones, relationships with ourselves. And again, coming back to the self-compassion, I think that's so important, and we see that so little at the moment and in life generally. And what Chris said earlier about how perhaps a lot of us have been taught to push through and to not really talk about things or admit that we're struggling. I think if we are able to soften that and understand that it's okay for things not to be okay.
It's interesting what Chris was saying, because it's all about this British stiff upper lip. You know, we're kind of trained, aren't we, to keep calm and carry on, even when there's this trauma. And I think especially for men, actually, they're told that they have to be they're brought up in a way that they have to be a protector and that they have to be strong and that it's not really manly to show this vulnerability. But I think what Chris is showing is that it is really important that men do speak out when they're troubled, because you feel so much better for it, don't you, Chris, now?
Yeah, without any doubt. I definitely feel that's a generational thing. I think my generation is just about the first generation of men, particularly, who is kind of able now to start to talk about the way things impact them like this. I don't think people much older than me have been able to do that. And I really, I feel for them. I really feel for them. It's so important to be able to talk. And I don't think I'd have thought, I would never have been dismissive of that for anyone. But even 5 years ago, I don't think I'd have truly believed it would be something that would help me. And now I feel it to such an extent. And I just wanted to pick up on something Mina said there as well about material things, because in a way that feels very, very separate to any of the issues I've dealt with. But I've never thought of myself as a materialistic person. But in the very first session that I saw Mina, it would have been in December last year, and I just saw a couple of months after this latest operation, the Glen, and early days of recovery, really looking back, and I saw my kids in their nativity play, and I just felt really, really sad, because I was still convinced this was going to be the last time. Somehow I was still convinced this was going to be the last time I'm ever going to see them in a nativity play. And I remember talking with Mina about that in the first session I had with her. And I had this quandary of, I need to just quit my job, travel around the world, have this most amazing last year perhaps of my life with my family. But at the same time, that's not realistic, because I could be here for a long time. I can't afford to do that. I don't want to quit my job. And I don't want them to I don't want to tell them everything and why are we doing this. And I've never been able to pinpoint. I don't even know why talking to Mina has been so helpful. There wasn't like a silver bullet. There wasn't like this amazing thing. But somehow through those conversations, in the past, I'd have thought of, this is just a day in the park, and 90% of me would still be thinking about work and what I need to do for work. And now that day, a day in the park, I know it sounds cheesy, feels so, so special. It's not just a day in the park. This is time with my kids. And I would say now, I don't think you can ever switch it off if you care about your job. And I'd say 10% of me might be thinking about my job now, and 90% is thinking about that day in the park and valuing that day in the park. Whereas in the past, I'd have been there, this is just a day in the park, thinking about checking my phone, thinking about emails. And like, I was so worried my life was about to end and I wasn't going to have any time with my kids. Now I value that free time I have, not just with my kids, but like, you know, if you're lucky enough to be able to go to the theatre, immerse yourself in it. Don't go there but still be thinking about work. I know it's really,
living in the present,
I know
Chris.
it's
That
really,
sounds
living in the present, which I never, again, these things would have felt a bit like to me a few years back. I wouldn't have blamed or been mocking anyone else, but to me it would have been like, yeah, we all live in the present or whatever. Now I really get it. I really get it. Like, and that is the most special thing you're going to have, time with the people around you, your friends, your family, whatever family you have. Just value that time.
You look like you found this new kind of joy in your life, Chris.
And I've always had a really happy life. I've always loved my job, my family, my friends. But I do feel a new level of that now. It's kind of, again, stuff I wouldn't have, like mindfulness. I guess to a degree, it's my version of that. And I still don't quite get what that is, but definitely taking just appreciation in the moment and the days that you have and what is around you, and the health that you still have too. There's so much that I am still able to do, and for 2 years of kind of fearing what I wouldn't be able to do anymore, now it's valuing what the so much that I am still able to do. So yeah, it is a real shift of a mindset, and I don't quite know how it happened, but it was being able to talk to someone who is professionally there to listen to you. And who you can say anything with without worrying that you're going to ruin their day. You know, I didn't want to share everything with my wife and my mum because they don't really have an answer. Like, no one has an answer, but I feel like I was going to have an impact on them. So I admit I'm really lucky to have Mina's support. Not everyone's going to be able to find that. But to just be able to talk about my fears, my insecurities, you know, just say anything and know that it's okay to say it and share it with her, made a big difference.
And what does the future hold now, Chris? I mean, you said that your heart's stable, but it hadn't improved.
Yeah.
What do you have to do? Is it kind of a watch and waiting kind of scenario?
Yeah, as it has been for most of my life, I guess. It's just monitoring it. Now, my heart's in heart failure. I might not have this right. I don't want to, but my understanding of what I've been told is once your heart's in heart failure, you can't reverse heart failure. Heart failure can go on for a very long time. It can go very quickly to the point where you would need a transplant. And it can also go in fits and starts. So it can progress and then slow and progress. And no one can really tell me much more than that, other than the Glen has stopped it getting worse over this last year. And again, dealing with uncertainty is something I've always struggled with, but I feel a lot more equipped to do that, having spoken to Mina now. I will, year by year, I'll have to go back, and one day they might say, you're going to need a transplant. And that's a reality that I just have to deal with. They may not. I may be really lucky and I can live the rest of my natural life and not have to resort to that. But it is still a reality I have to face. I'm really happy that I had the Glen. I definitely feel better than a year ago, and I feel better prepared, much better prepared for having been able to talk about it and got mental health support, much better equipped to deal with any bad news that I might have to deal with again. So yeah, overridingly, I'm in a positive place, and I feel like mine is a positive story, and that's another reason I wanted to share it.
Oh, thank you for sharing it. And Mina, Chris, he does sound mentally in a much better place than I know he was when he had that devastating news. And, you know, as he said, he found it totally overwhelming.
Yeah.
Would you like to see more psychologists like you available to help people like Chris who've had hard to bear news?
Absolutely. There are not enough of us, and they're all the services are so busy. We acknowledge the impacts, and then there's just not enough of us. We have long waiting lists, and it can take us up to 6 months now to see patients. And we are aware that, you know, patients need to see us when they're actually going through it. It could be just before surgery or just after surgery, like in Chris's case. So, in order for us to be able to be there for patients when they need us, we need more of us. Absolutely.
And we know, don't we, that being able to go into surgery with a positive outlook can be beneficial towards the outcome, can't it?
Absolutely. During, after, in terms of how we look after ourselves, how we engage, how we cooperate, how we adhere to all these lifestyle changes that perhaps we need to make, how to seek support, how to manage situations, work, all of that. I mean, I think psychology should be, and I think in a lot of cases it's very valued, and I can see that, but I think that needs to sort of spread even more.
Is there any way that somebody who's had some life-changing news, they might have found out they've got a condition or an illness, or they need a procedure or something like that, if somebody's in that situation and they're feeling overwhelmed, where can they go for help?
Well, we would assume that they will be under cardiology, under a hospital. So first, we would recommend to ask in their teams if there is psychology. If there isn't, they can always try the British Heart Foundation and see if there are any local resources, any group supports in their area. If for some reason there isn't in where they live, then it's important to know that each borough has a mental sort of health team for mild and moderate difficulties, which are called talking therapies, or IAPT. They go by both names, mainly talking therapies now. So that's definitely something to consider. They won't be getting perhaps the specialist support that they might need at that point, but it could definitely be helpful to make them understand, make sense of what's happening first, and to feel a bit better equipped to deal with this uncertainty and what they're experiencing, really.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Chris, so much for sharing your story. And I hope that you go on and that your health improves further. So thank you for telling us all about what you've been going through.
Thanks, Angie. No, it's been a real privilege. I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk about Ebstein's and the mental health challenge of heart surgery too, and keep up the great work with your podcast, because that's really helped me too, listening to your podcast and the inspirational stories other people have been sharing on it. I certainly feel that a lot of people take heart and inspiration and a bit of strength from hearing what others have been able to cope with, and I think your series is invaluable for that. So thank you for the podcast.
Thank you so much for saying that. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Mina.
And thank you, Andrew, as well. It's been an amazing opportunity. And thank you, Chris. And you know how I found our work together so rewarding. So thank you so much for all your work.
You've absolutely, I can't tell you how valuable you've been to my whole life outlook. So I'm so grateful I got the chance to come under your care, and I'll be forever grateful.
Oh, thank you. And this might be a first, actually, for patients and therapists to be so together and publicly talking. I don't know.
It's lovely to hear you, Chris, that you've got so much support from Mina, and Mina's obviously gets a lot of enjoyment from helping you as well. It's wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you both so much. Thank you. I'm journalist Angela Walker, and today I've been in conversation with BBC Sports reporter Chris Slegg and clinical psychologist Mina Arvanitopoulou. I do hope you've enjoyed the show. Please take a moment to rate and review, because that means that the algorithms mean the podcast will get shown to more people. And you can get in touch with me through my website, angelawalkerreports.com. Until next time, goodbye.